astrology, the sun and moon represent the masculine and feminine principles, while Aries and Libra represent the axis of relationships. Tune in when Chris Flisher and his Aries sun go head-to-head with Debra Clement and her Libra moon about a subject near and dear to everyone's heart. Relationships. Will the ram run roughshod over a weltering Libra moon? Or will the moon's sweet powers of persuasion stop the Aries beast in his tracks? To find out, tune in to a very special presentation of He Says, She Says Astrology with Chris Flisher and Debra Clement.
Welcome to He Says, She Says Astrology. I'm Debra Ann Clement.
And I'm Chris Flisher. And we are going to talk about relationships, and that's why it's called He Says, She Says. We don't always agree, which is fine. That's the way it goes. But we like to have a lively conversation about various aspects of what relationships are all about. And today we're going to talk about the 10th house.
Yeah, because the 10th house, though, people tend to think of it as the destiny, the career, but it is about relationships. It's about relationships with we used to say the authoritative parent, but really with anyone who has authority over you, right? A boss, for example, that's a relationship.
Or anyone who may turn to you for advice or follows you. Like, if you're on Facebook and somebody follows you, then in many ways you could say that is a 10th house characteristic. It's more about how people tend to think of it as career oriented. I think that's true. But what do you say to the college student? I think I would say it's more about how you occupy your time. So occupation is a better word, I think, for the 10th house, because it can imply career, job, yes, but it can also apply to how you occupy your time.
I think it is a bigger picture than certainly, because when I think about job, I do think, or daily routine, I certainly go to the 6th house. So the 10th house to me is higher. But your note about, let's say, a college student, I think is an excellent point, because if you're in university, you're studying, you've got a lot of people in authority over you, quite frankly.
You sure do.
The people, yeah, like everyone who grades your papers.
Mm-hmm. And even if you're, supposing you're a boomer and you're taking care of an elderly parent, for example, that person is your authority, and your parents will always be your authority. So in many ways, as that relationship shifts and you're in a caretaking mode, that is your occupation. That is your, quote unquote supervisor, I guess, or who you answer to.
No, it's also what's interesting about that is, yes, they have a role, let's say, as a parent, right? They're always a parent and authority. And that role shifts, and you can think of them if you're doing caretaking as what did you just say? You're caretaking as you're
caregiving. Yeah, you're
caregiving, right? Okay, God, losing it here. But sometimes the role reverses, because depending on a parent's health, if they really, if they're out of it, they can't take care of themselves at all. You actually become their authority figure.
Right. Well, that's the interesting thing about maturing, I guess. You grow up as a dependent of them, and then they eventually turn around and become a dependent of you. And, that's where, so, it depends upon many ways. You might find your mother or father in that place, depending upon where you are, because they is the authority over who you are. But it really is how, the idea of occupation. Now, we think of, if we go through the various planets in that 10th house, it can be quite intriguing to see someone who's a very successful person with a strong sun in the 10th.
Someone with a sun in the 10th house usually is pretty comfortable or has a desire actually to be, though, because it is a public house, to be in an authority. I'm going to say an authority position. Yeah. They aim for the top.
They do. I think it depends upon with the sign and all that. But I think that the ability for that person to they're sort of their it's almost like their marching orders. Their modus operandi is to be of an authoritative stature.
Because it's the sun that rules Leo, right?
That's right.
And it is. They do very well as an authority.
Yeah. When you go to the moon in the 10th house, I think it's more about sort of wearing your heart in your sleeve for the public to see, or using your emotional imprint to express yourself and to garner success and recognition through that. I think there's a certain piece of that. If you're like, I have moon in my 10th house, ironically, and I think that when I'm doing this with you or anything, I'm sort of letting my emotions get involved, which is natural for the moon, And that is part of, hopefully, my appeal.
Yeah, it is. We'll let you have that one.
Oh, thank you.
The moon in the 10th house, when I see the moon in the 10th house as well, I am just going to say, because it is an emotional, right? It's the emotions. It's also nurturing. But the moon, also speaks to the masses and the public at large in that respect. So I just feel that when I see the moon in the 10th house, it is someone, they're not always the most comfortable, and quite frankly, in the public eye, because the moon sometimes can be a little bit shy.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, it can be a little bit shy. It's a little bit, right, it fluctuates. And so I do feel that depending on the sign, moon in the 10th house can indicate a person who's, can actually be pretty persuasive.
Ah, yeah, because they get you they know where to get you. But you're right about the shyness. There's a certain reluctance, and I think that can come with maturity. I think that as you get more mature, you might grow into that and able to sort of use that ability to nurture and to be empathetic and to understand to your favor.
So, what do you think about Mercury in the 10th house?
Well, Mercury in the 10th house, I think, would be great for a newscaster. It'd be great for a writer. It'd be great for an actor. It'd be great for anybody who wants to communicate or is in a communicative mode. I think a teacher as well, someone who doesn't mind being in front, who wants to use their words to express themselves and further their agenda.
Well, I'm going to say also that with Mercury in the 10th house, very often it speaks to someone who has more than one, in terms of their work or how they occupy their time, more than one thing going on. Sometimes it's interchangeable, quite frankly. Some skills are used for both.
Yeah.
But they're usually, depending again, we say about the sign, but there's usually a need for variety. There's a restlessness, I feel, with Mercury in the 10th.
Restlessness is a very good word because, it moves so quickly and the interchange is so fast and there's that sense of excitement and stuff. But I mean, I think if we looked at the charts of famous people who were in those roles, like a Walter Cronkite or somebody like that, or, Matt Lauer, whoever you want to pick out, I'm sure that they have a strong placement of that.
Venus in the 10th house is usually a pretty it's a likable placement. It tends to be a popular placement. So I've read.
Yeah, I think it's a great placement. I think that. Wait, do you have that in your?
Of course I do. I wanted to be modest.
You didn't convince me. Oh no, you didn't.
Well, it's conjunct Chiron, so
it's okay. No, but I think that I think that's also a place where someone would be viewed very positively through the eyes of anybody. So having a Venus in the 10th, I think, and when I use those words, I put them together and I think of all the different areas in which people could be. I think of I try to pull examples because astrology really is a collection of stories. And I look out and I say, well, there's somebody who could be, known for their beauty, known for their looks, someone who uses their outward appearance like a model, perhaps, or someone who is very photogenic or uses their physical presence to further their agenda in some ways. And that's an interesting way of looking at it, I think.
I didn't get the genes for that, but I did have... But I have Venus in Aquarius, so I think I've used my mind. I would say, yeah.
And you're doing it in a very community-oriented way, so you should be very proud of that.
But Venus in the 10th, yeah, it certainly can be likable. Now Mars in the 10th.
Well, you get things done. It's ambitious.
Yeah, it's ambitious, and it can be competitive.
Almost to a fault, I would say. I mean, there can be that. If you're supposing, did you ever see the movie Glengarry Glen Ross?
Oh my God! Yes.
It's all about these guys who are in the real estate business and they're vying for each other's property and they're backstabbing each other left and right. That would be Mars in the 10th.
ABC, always be closing. Yep.
Always be closing, right.
I remember that.
Yeah, that was Jack Lemmon, wasn't it? Jack Lemmon?
Yes, it was Jack Lemmon, and there were a number of big names in it. I don't remember the others, but I certainly remember Jack Lemmon. And but Mars in the 10th, I will say to its credit, because like I say, it does get things done. It's ambitious. It aims for the top, and it generally does not quit.
Right. Tenacity. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that. When we look at Jupiter, I have a son, one of my children has Jupiter in the 10th house and has yet to manifest. Let's put it that way. I would think that would mean that he'd be very good at work, which I think he is. But I think that it would indicate a certain sense of good fortune with regard to work. And as I said, he hasn't seen that yet. I think that's a long-term trend, hopefully.
Well, my daughter has Jupiter in the 10th as well. And, she teaches. So it manifested, certainly, I'm going to say, in that respect. But I do think that Jupiter in the 10th house, if somebody does want to be, in the public eye or be famous, even if it's just, I'm not talking about on Time Magazine, it could just be, in their field.
Performing for some way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Jupiter in the 10th, I mean, I can tell you, it can be a pretty, it's a good start.
It's a very good start. And my son's a musician, so he's in that position where he does perform. He does get out. He does put himself out there. And in order to do that, you've got to have the chutzpah to do that.
Yeah, it takes confidence.
Mm-hmm. Now,
right.
Saturn in the 10th, can't find a better worker.
Can't find a better worker, but it can also be a very tough boss. If you've got a boss, that's the difference to me. If you've got a boss with a Jupiter in the 10th house, that might be your pal. They may take everybody out for drinks. Saturn in the 10th house as an authority figure can be have very high standards, very tough. And I'm just going to say really just hard to please.
Yeah. I had a boss with a Saturn in the 10th. And this is back when my children were first born. And I had to do a lot of daycare. And, so if anybody who's ever raised a child and you're in a job, you're always balancing who takes the day off when the child is sick. And so my wife and I would balance it off. It's my turn, your turn. We get into these discussions, oftentimes arguments about, I stayed home last time. It's your turn. I got a meeting today, blah, blah, blah. But this boss was not the least bit understanding of my predicament and having to deal with this. This was back in the 80s. And I said, listen, my son's got an ear infection. He can't go to school today. I've got to stay home. And she held that against me many times in my performance appraisals. And nothing I could do about it. It was clearly discrimination. But they did not suffer that kindly. And it was interesting. It wasn't until she had her own children that she changed her tune.
Yeah. Yeah, well, experience is often the best, right? The best teacher. I mean, back in the 80s, childcare, quite frankly, it wasn't an issue. People tended to ignore it. It's like, well, stay home with your kids, and let the, I hate to say, it was still, let the wife, mostly the mother, take off a year, whatever the case may be. So it was a different time as well. But generally speaking, and Saturn can be, quite frankly, Saturn could be a little bit cold,
very chilly, very conservative, high expectations. Because they have such a strong work ethic themselves, they expect that in everybody else who works for them.
Yeah, and they can absolutely put work, and that's one of the downfalls I want to say of Saturn and even Capricorn is that all work and no play, or giving too much time to the office and not enough time to personal relationships.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I love that because that's true. That's where you would find someone who may have sacrificed the relationship for the job.
Yeah.
They're willing to take that and saying, well, the job is more important. Or they're the people that sometimes you might think who are, in their 50s and not married. And they're the ones that are always burning their office lights are the last ones to go off. But, from a company standpoint or a supervisory standpoint, if you have a Capricorn, if you have a Saturn in a 10th house employee, you're generally getting a lot out of them.
You're getting
good investment.
You're getting your money's worth and more. Absolutely. I agree with that. I agree.
Yeah.
Now, Uranus in the 10th house. Oops. So I'm going to look at Uranus in the 10th house whenever I see that, and especially if it is close. I want to say if it is close to the midheaven. Uranus in the 10th house, it's a polarizing position. It's a polarizing placement. And I'm just going to say it can come across as a person can come across as being kind of arrogant, kind of defiant. But what I have found time and time again with people with Uranus, and again, close to the midheaven, is a lot of times people either get them or they don't. They love them or they hate them.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah. I was going to say, I think that's an accurate observation. I think that people who have that placement in the 10th house might look at unusual jobs. Maybe they're a trapeze artist, or they have some sort of unusual job that's not conventional. I think that's something. And also, there's a high level of volatility in their stability in the job. I think they tend to shift jobs quite frequently.
Or lose jobs, as the case may.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Sometimes it's voluntary, but with Uranus, a lot of times it's not, because there is that wherever Uranus is in the chart, we do tend to experience some sense of instability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or I would say a little bit of eccentricity. There's a sense of perhaps choosing an unusual career that may not be sort of standard, or sort of striking out on your own. There's all the words that we attribute to Uranus, sort of the rebellion, innovation, restlessness, revolutionary. Those things all apply to the person.
And let's not forget, Uranus rules astrology.
Yeah, so there you go. That's where mine is. Right? It's in my 10th house. And I've always had good, solid, steady jobs until I got to be about 58. And then it all stopped.
But the astrology, but think about that.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
Right, how you occupy your time, right? Even these years, yes, you worked, but Uranus is in astrology.
And what's interesting about that's totally right. What's interesting about that is that, I was born with that signature, and yet it took us a certain number of years to get there for that to come to be active, which I think is an important piece of the conversation, especially with regard to relationships. A lot of things get triggered. They may be there at some point in life, but an event has to happen in order to push you to that spot. And perhaps, you may not see it when you're 12, but you might see it when you're 60.
It gets triggered.
Yeah.
Right? Something comes along and triggers it, and it blossoms.
And then that's sort of manifest destiny, if you think about it. That's sort of the idea behind that movie Slumdog Millionaire. If you've ever seen that, all the events that happen in his life bring him to this point in time where, boom, there he is. And that's fascinating.
And I think the other side of Uranus, though, in the 10th house, it is about freedom. It's about being able to express yourself freely, without inhibition, as an individual.
Yeah, I think that's true. It was interesting because I had a job where it was a fairly conventional job. I was sitting in an office in a cubicle, blah, blah, blah. And we had this company newsletter that I used to contribute to. It would come out every 2 weeks. And in there, I started a music column. So I used to write music articles and do trivia contests through this newsletter. And I was doing it on company time, and everybody thought it was great. Nobody gave me a hard time, even though I was supposed to be writing about something very technical. I spent half my time writing about music articles. So go figure.
That's good. That is good. I like that.
That's Uranus in the 10th. That was what it was. And I spent most of my time on my headphones. And even though I always do my work, got everything done, but I put a lot of time in the other place too. So.
And they were fine with it, you see?
They were fine with it. So now we get to Neptune in the 10th. I always think of Neptune in the 10th as someone who has, I would think of sort of the obvious things would come to me would be sort of like, film, photography, theater, psychology, any of those things that have to deal with sort of, the esoteric mindset of the arts. But there are also other pieces of it, which might be, that sense of ambiguity and personal identification.
Well, again, depending on the chart, but Neptune in the 10th house sometimes can actually be very glamorous. It lends this mystery. I'm just going to say
it's a certain allure.
Yes.
Allure. Yeah, glamour. I like that. That's a good word. I think that's what I refer to when I think about an actress or an actor. They might have that because they're in a world that is not real. They're operating in a world that's not real, and so that sort of fills that Neptunian void.
I feel that when Neptune is in the 10th, and again, I'm going to say especially when it's close to the MC, the person, and I don't mean any disrespect to anyone who has it, but there's something about the glamour where I feel the person comes across like better than they actually are.
Oh, of course. I think that's totally, it's all about illusion and delusion. This is the thing. This is the idea of you're presenting yourself. It's sort of like there's this patina or this veil of allure that comes with it. And it may not be accurate and it may not be who you really are. And you may even be deceived by that. You may be fooled by that person. You thought this person is more than they are, and they're not what they're not what you thought they were.
No, it happens. It certainly happens. The other thing, though, about Neptune, because it is the 10th house, if you talk about, so like people will talk about career, how you occupy your time, because of that ambiguity, sometimes it takes people a long time to figure out what it is that gives them satisfaction.
I'm still trying.
No, I will.
Well, no, we're all afloat here.
Yeah.
But it is, I think that, Neptune, I think of Neptune as the ruler of, the imagery. And I always think of, the photograph. That's why I mentioned photography and theater. There's sort of this, it's this surreal. There's a sense of surreality to it.
Neptune can be lucky. I don't always think of it that way, but there are times Neptune can actually be pretty lucky. And so again, when you're talking about fame, sometimes Neptune can be fortunate there. Of course, the other side of it is, it could be infamy as well.
Right. Or fall from grace.
Yes.
I think of someone like, who has achieved great heights and all of a sudden there's a fall from grace, someone like a Kevin Spacey or something like that, who was once this fantastic actor and all his work is in vain now. And
Neptune rules scandals, some follows.
It certainly does follow. And I don't know his chart, but that's the sort of thing. So like I said earlier, or other times, these are all about stories. And so we have to sort of weave these stories in a way of illustrating the themes there. Pluto
in the 10th house can be very I'm going to say it can almost be an intimidating energy that's projected because the 10th house, like I said, being this public house, that those with Pluto in the 10th come across not just as an authority, but I'm just going to actually use the word intimidating. It's a very strong energy. I think strong is an understatement. It's very powerful.
Yeah, it's almost, and they may not even know they have it themselves, but they project a sense of ominousness. I know that's not a word, but it is now.
It is now.
There's a sense of subliminal power that you can't quite put your finger on, and we've all probably maybe met people like this. But I also think that there's a piece of it that I think someone who would have a position here who might be sort of following a sort of a predestined area of their lives. I think of someone like a minister or a chaplain or somebody who is involved with something that is a different kind of a job. I mean, that may also apply to Neptune. It could also apply to Uranus, I suppose, as well. But I think that there's a sense of kismet or fate having to do with what they're doing for their work when they have that position.
It's also, there's a lot of ambition. There's a lot of ambition with Pluto in the 10th house. And, I used to joke about this with clients, but then they would all agree. So I'll say this, that very often people who have Pluto in the 10th house, it's like when they sit there and they're getting reviewed by their superior, in their mind, if you could see the little bubble with the words, it's saying like, this should be the other way around. I should be reviewing you.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. There's a sense of seriousness, but I do think that there is you could almost see somebody who had a Pluto in 10th house saying, I was born to do this. I was born to do this.
I think that's perfect. I actually think that's perfect because there is that sense of that they've got a great destiny ahead of them.
Right. And they, as if they're in many ways, their choices are easy. I always thought when I was younger in high school and didn't know what I wanted to do, I said, gosh, and I'd see people going off to law school and going off to become a veterinarian or whatever, like how these people know what they want to do. I mean, I'm interested in all those things, but I don't know if I want to do that. But they knew what they wanted to do and they followed through in it. I almost feel as if Pluto has a sense of that to it. Like they just know they were born to do this and this is what they're going to go do.
I used to envy that in people when I was young
too.
Because I wanted to do so. It seemed like every few years, it changed. And I've been through a lot of different careers. I have to say. So yeah, still figuring it out.
Well, that's what I mean.
It's evolving. It's evolving. We're evolving. That's what it is, Chris. We're evolving.
Oh, I didn't know that. Now that all is clear. Thank you for clarifying that. But the idea though that I always thought that people were lucky to know that they wanted to do something. You just woke up in the morning and said, I'm going to go do this. They had singleness of mind. There weren't many choices. This was almost like the choice was made for them and they had to go do this, which is why I think of people with a higher calling, which brings me back to sort of the religious angle. Not everybody wants to grow up to be a Catholic priest. Not everybody wants to be, a rabbi. But if they feel that calling, you might see that represented in the Pluto in the 10th, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, let's never forget that Pluto does rule the 8th house. It's life after death. It's the mysteries of life.
Mm-hmm. So it's a much deeper topic. You're not selling vacuum cleaners, I don't think, with a Pluto. No, you're probably, helping, homeless people or some sort of altruistic, greater cause, higher authority kind of purpose in your life. I think that's pretty accurate.
Making a difference.
Making a difference, yeah. And so they don't take their job lightly. There's a certain sense of here, but there is that quality you mentioned earlier. There's a sense of foreboding power about them. It's very subliminal. You can just, wow, this person's tough or powerful.
You just feel it. You feel it as soon as you get within, 15 feet of them. It's like you feel it.
Yeah.
But I will say this, when I'm looking at the horoscope and I look at the sign on the cusp of the 10th house, some of the things that I have seen over the years certainly is that when it comes to, let's say, occupying the time or the career, Aries, and even relationships with the boss, when I see someone with Aries on the 10th house, that's usually somebody who ultimately, ideally, would like their own business. They want to be the top dog, but they really want to have control. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to make, with Aquarius, it's very similar. They want that same amount of freedom, but Aquarius is a little bit more unusual hours.
I'd say they're also more community minded.
Yeah.
They're maybe the kind of person who works for others in a way that, maybe a politician, for example. I mean, not that they work for us, but
they're supposed to, but yes, in the ideal sense.
They're working against us right now. But anyway, I think that's that kind of person who would do well as a social worker, someone whose aim is larger than just themselves. I think that there's a sense of altruism there, a sense of outreach. Those are positive things there. But the cusp is important. The house cusp, I think, is, you raise a really good point there, because it sort of colors whatever planets are in there. So it lends a patina, for lack of a better term, a sheen, a veneer to whatever those planets are that are there. It sort of sets the stage for that. So a person with a Gemini midheaven would be someone who is a speaker or a talker or someone who used words, and those planets that might come in the 10th house following that would be imbued with that sensitivity.
No, absolutely. And I'll say similar to Mercury in the 10th, Gemini on the 10th, usually more than one thing going on at the same time. And that might be someone who they publish books, and maybe they do workshops, depending on what they do. They do a workshop based on the book, or they do courses based on the book. But there's usually something that's interchangeable.
Multitasking is the word. That's so right. That is completely the word. They may have several different things going on at once. You're right. So in that regard, they are very versatile, very quick thinking, very productive. People often are amazed at the amount that they can get done, and they say, how can you do this? Because it's just the way they are, and it's inevitable, and that's how they're manifesting that flavor. But the cusp is very important. You may have planets in a certain sign, but the house cusp really drives the tone and the theme of that house.
No, and sometimes the planets are the same sign as the house cusp, but very often they're not.
Right. But they take on that shade. So this is where you get into the nuance of astrology, which is one of the fascinating things about it, which requires an eye. I think you have, a lot of us have, is that you have to be able to understand how that story is told differently when the position of those planets and the cusp is relevant. So
taking it all in and blending it.
Yeah. But, these are, when we think about, so what's interesting about this is that when we talk about the 10th house, people, I'd say after the 7th house, the 10th house is probably the most asked about in my practice. At least people come to me, when am I going to get love? When am I going to get the job I love? And so those are the two big questions that I see all the time. So I think that the 10th house is important. And we talked about the 1st and the 4th. Those are more personal sort of, beginning of your life stages. When you get to the 7th house, you're already you're mature, you're looking for someone else. And then the 10th house, of course, is your career, how you're going to spend your life. There's a lot that has to go in there with regard to those concepts.
I find a lot, certainly love, the relationships is important. And career in terms of the direction in life. And that usually goes hand in hand with money.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so the idea of, people want to be successful. We measure our success by money in our contemporary society, although it not necessarily doesn't have to be the case. We could measure our lives in personal satisfaction. We don't have to have perhaps wealth. That's what I tell myself now, because I haven't got it. That's my rationale.
But you know what I do see? What I see is that when it comes to the money, certainly the money, the career, and the boomers, okay, our generation, the boomers, I do find a lot of clients come, and it's more about the second act. I mean, some people call it the third act. To me, it's a second act. And they are looking for more about the direction. It's not so much about the money. They may have, retiring something. They may have a pension, or maybe they've got enough saved. And so they're looking for something that's more of a calling, something that's going to where they can actually make a difference and do whatever it is that they wanted to do. That maybe when they were younger, they were told either they didn't have access to it, or they would say, hey, listen, you can't make a living at that. So, forget it.
Right. If you've got children in school and a mortgage and you got to put food on the table, you can't necessarily go off and be a street singer. So,
nope. You can dream about it, but.
So I think that's a relevant point that I always talk about when people have their second Saturn return. I think that it really should be more self-centered as far as focus, as opposed to being outwardly focused. I think your first Saturn return is all about growing up, getting the houses, having the babies, getting the jobs. Second Saturn return, I sort of see, as you mentioned, that sort of secondary, now is my time to go make my chance.
Exactly. That first time, it's that big learning curve of, I hate to say like being an adult, but maybe you've moved out, or you're having your children. And it's about really learning about responsibility. By the time your second Saturn return comes, hopefully you have learned about responsibility. And it is time for Saturn to reward, to be a little kinder and say, do something for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I think, maybe what you may have put off when you were younger because you did have to pay bills, you now pick up and you can do it it, and you at least pursue it on the side. I always thought that it's wise that people, my father always drilled this into my head. He said, it's one thing to have a vocation. It's another thing to have an avocation. And I was always into music when I was a kid. And I said, I want to work in a record store. My father says, what are you, crazy? You're not going to make any money in a record store. He says, let that be your avocation. Do that on the weekends and then go out and get a real job during the week. I said, okay, well, I listened to him. So but I always wanted to own a record store.
That's what you wanted, yeah. Well, that's where your heart was, right? That's where your heart and soul.
When I was 18, yeah, that's what I wanted to do. But he thought I was crazy, and he let his opinion be known, and I took it to heart and followed through as a good son. Did the right thing for a long time, which I'm glad I did. Because if I hadn't done it, I never would have gotten to where I am today. I wouldn't have had a house. I wouldn't have had children if I hadn't done that. I would have been sitting in a record store somewhere.
That's the practical side of it, right? That's the practical side of it.
So that's the 10th house in a nutshell. I think we did it pretty well.
In a nutshell, that was the 10th house.
Yeah.
And so that wraps up actually this episode of He Says, She Says Astrology. I should let you say it sometime.
Well, I do say it sometimes. Don't worry. You're not gonna walk over me too easily. Don't worry about that. And next time we're going to be we'll start working in the fixed houses. So that's going to be fun. And we'll get to that next time. So
we'll be talking about money, right? We'll be talking about money.
Money, creativity.
Yeah. The mysteries of life.
Mysteries of life. Wow.
Right, we'll be talking, yes. We'll have a lot on our plate.
Yeah. Oh, well. Anyway, this is He Says, She Says Astrology. I'm Chris Flisher.
I'm Debra Ann Clement.
And we will talk to you next time around. Take care. Thanks for listening to He Says, She Says Astrology podcast. For more information or to schedule a private or personal reading by either Chris Flisher or Debra Clement, visit chrisflisher.com, turningofthewheel.com, or debraclementastrologer.com, and subscribe for more great podcasts in the future.